I always believed that family was sacred, that the bond between sisters was unbreakable. I was wrong. 3 years ago, my life shattered in ways I never imagined. I was married to David, the love of my life, or so I thought. We had built a beautiful life together, filled with love, laughter, and dreams of a future. But all of that crumbled the moment I discovered the betrayal. It wasn't just any betrayal. It was my own sister, Laura. Laura had always been the golden child, beautiful, charismatic, the one everyone adored. My parents doted on her, and growing up, I always felt like I was living in her shadow. But I never held it against her. She was my sister, my best friend. I trusted her with my life. Until the day I found out she had been sleeping with my husband. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. I remember standing in our bedroom, clutching my phone, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the damning messages. The words were seared into my brain. The stolen moments, the secret rendezvous, the whispered I love yous meant for me but given to her instead. I confronted them both. There were screaming, tears, denial, and finally, admission. David stood there, emotionless, while Laura, with her crocodile tears, begged for my understanding. We didn't mean for this to happen, she had sobbed. But she never let him go. Humiliated and heartbroken, I walked away. 3 years passed. Laura and David got married, flaunting their happiness for the world to see. Meanwhile, I picked up my shattered pieces, determined to move forward. But fate has a strange way of balancing the scales. Because 3 years later, a family secret surfaced. One that would leave Laura speechless and change everything she thought she knew about our father, our family, and the man she stole from me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one drowning in betrayal. Growing up, Laura and I were close, or at least, I thought we were. She was the dazzling one, the kind of person who could light up a room with her presence, while I was always the quieter, more practical sister. She thrived on attention, and I never minded letting her have the spotlight. It was the unspoken dynamic of our relationship, the silent agreement we had for years. But looking back, I should have seen the cracks. Laura was the kind of person who took what she wanted, regardless of the consequences. Whether it was the last slice of cake, the better dress, or even my mother's affection, she always managed to claim it as hers. But I never imagined she would go as far as taking my husband. David and I met in college. He was charming, driven, and everything I wanted in a partner. We built a solid life together, dinners with inside jokes, late-night talks about our future, shared dreams of children and a house filled with warmth. To me, our love was unshakable. Then, Laura entered the picture. She had always been flirtatious, but I never saw her as a threat. She had her own relationships, her own life. But after my wedding, I noticed subtle changes, little things that didn't make sense at the time. She started coming over more often, lingering in conversations with David, laughing a little too hard at his jokes. At first, I brushed it off. But then, she began dressing differently when she knew he'd be around, more polished, more alluring. My instincts whispered that something was wrong, but I silenced them. After all, she was my sister. The truth came crashing down one afternoon when I arrived home earlier than expected. I walked into my own house, and there they were, David and Laura, locked in an embrace. The room spun. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. They sprang apart, panic flashing in their eyes, but the damage was done. What is this? My voice was barely above a whisper. David had nothing to say. Laura, on the other hand, burst into tears, as if she was the victim. It's not what it looks like, she sobbed, but we all knew that was a lie. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked out. The divorce was swift. David didn't fight me on anything, perhaps out of guilt, or maybe because he had already moved on with her. Laura and I stopped speaking. My parents, caught in the middle, refused to take sides. Family is family, they kept saying, as if that justified the betrayal. For 3 years, I lived with the pain. I built my life back up, focusing on my career, my peace, my healing. I thought I had left the past behind me, until the day my father's secret came out. It started with a letter, an old, yellowed envelope that my mother found tucked away in the attic. She called me over, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "You should see this," she said, handing me the envelope. I opened it, my fingers trembling. The words inside unraveled everything I thought I knew about our family. And as fate would have it, it was Laura who would be affected the most. The letter sat in my hands, fragile with age, its edges worn from years of being hidden away. My mother hovered nearby, watching me with an anxious expression. I could tell she already knew what was inside. Perhaps she had known for a long time. I took a deep breath and unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the first few lines. My heart pounded. The words blurred together as the weight of their meaning crashed over me like a tidal wave. To my beloved daughter. If you are reading this, then the time has come for the truth to be known. I looked up at my mother. "Daughter." My voice was barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then sat down across from me, wringing her hands. "It's about Laura." A chill ran down my spine. "What about Laura?" I asked, my grip tightening on the letter. My mother exhaled slowly, as if summoning the courage to say the words out loud. "She's not your full sister, Cassid." My stomach twisted. "What?" "She's only your half-sister," she admitted. "Your father had an affair. Laura is the result of that affair." I sat frozen, my mind scrambling to process what I had just heard. The father I had idolized, the man who had always preached loyalty and honesty, had been keeping this secret for years. "Does Laura know?" I asked, my voice sharp. "No," my mother admitted. "Your father never told her. He raised her as his own because he loved her, despite everything." Could barely breathe. Laura, the sister who had taken everything from me, who had stolen my husband without a shred of remorse, had been living a lie her whole life. She wasn't the golden child. She wasn't the rightful heir to my father's name. She was the product of betrayal, just like what she had done to me. The irony was cruel. For years, I had carried the weight of Laura's betrayal. I had suffered in silence while she played the role of the perfect daughter, the adored sister, the woman who got everything she wanted. But now, fate had turned the tables. And she had no idea what was coming. I wrestled with the decision for days. Should I tell her? Should I let her live in the illusion she had so carefully crafted for herself? Part of me wanted to walk away, to let karma do its work. But another part of me, the part that had suffered in silence, needed her to know. The opportunity presented itself at a family dinner. My mother had invited both of us over, unaware that I knew the truth. Laura arrived with David, her smug smile firmly in place, her fingers laced with his as if parading her victory in my face. But tonight, I wasn't the one who would be humiliated. Dinner started off as expected, Laura talking about her life with David, my parents listening attentively, pretending nothing had ever happened. It was sickening how easily they accepted it. Then, I cleared my throat. "I found something interesting in Dad's things the other day." Laura barely glanced at me. "Oh." "A letter," I continued, watching her carefully. "It was hidden in the attic." My mother paled, and my father stiffened. Laura, oblivious, rolled her eyes. "And?" I leaned forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "It was a letter addressed to his daughter. But it wasn't about me." Laura's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. "It was about you," I said. "Turns out you're not my full sister. You're my half-sister." Silence fell over the room like a heavy fog. David's fork clattered onto his plate. My father looked away. My mother stared at her lap. "But Laura." She laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. "You're lying," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "You're just trying to get back at me." I shrugged. "Ask Dad." Her head snapped toward our father, her smile faltering. "Dad." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The color drained from her face. "Dad," she repeated, her voice cracking this time. "Tell her she's lying." But he didn't. That was all the confirmation she needed. Laura's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her glass of water. You're serious?" My father nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry, Laura." She shook her head violently, her carefully curated world collapsing around her. No, no, this is a mistake. This is some kind of sick joke. It's not, my mother said softly. We should have told you sooner. Laura turned to me then, her eyes wild with anger and desperation. You knew. And you decided to tell me like this. I met her gaze evenly. I thought you deserved to know the truth. Just like I deserved to know the truth when you stole my husband. The words hung between us like a dagger. David shifted uncomfortably. He had been silent this entire time, watching the unraveling drama like a spectator at a train wreck. Laura's lip quivered. This isn't the same. Oh, it isn't. I tilted my head. You lied. You betrayed me. And now you find out that your entire life has been a lie. Tell me, how does it feel? Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing for her. No sympathy. No pity. Only the cold satisfaction of justice finally being served. David finally found his voice. This doesn't change anything, he muttered. Laura is still. I turned to him, my voice like ice. Still what? The woman you cheated on me with? The woman you left me for? You deserve each other. Laura shot up from her chair, her face twisted with emotion she couldn't contain. You did this on purpose, she spat. You wanted to hurt me. I leaned back, arms crossed. No, Laura. You did this to yourself. She stormed out of the dining room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. David hesitated before following her, torn between loyalty and disbelief. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something lift off my shoulders. Laura had taken everything from me. But life had a way of settling its debts. And this time, I was the one walking away with my head held high. Laura's world had just crumbled before her eyes. For years, she had basked in the glow of being the favored daughter, the one who could do no wrong. She had taken my husband, stolen my future, and flaunted her victory as if I were nothing more than a stepping stone in her path to happiness. But now, she was the one drowning in betrayal. She fled from the dinner table, her footsteps echoing sharply through the hallway. David hesitated before following, torn between comforting her and processing what he had just learned. I remained seated, feeling the weight of justice settle over me like a long overdue embrace. My father sat with his head in his hands, guilt radiating from him like a fever. My mother wiped at her eyes, but no one moved to chase after Laura. Not this time. A part of me had expected to feel triumphant, to finally have my revenge. But as I watched Laura's perfect world implode, I realized something else. She had lived a lie her entire life, just as she had forced me to live in pain. And maybe, just maybe, that was punishment enough. Then, from the other room, came the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I stood, instincts kicking in. I had no desire to comfort Laura, but something in me, a lingering thread of sisterhood, perhaps, told me to check on her. I walked down the hall, my hands clenched at my sides, and stepped into the living room. Laura stood there, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her hands trembling at her sides. The glass of water she had been holding now lay in shards on the floor. Her face was pale, her lips parted as if she had forgotten how to breathe. David stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. What else are you hiding? Laura's voice was barely above a whisper, but the fury in it was unmistakable. She turned to my father, her eyes glistening with rage and something else, desperation. My father exhaled, his shoulders sagging. Laura, was my mother even your wife? She demanded. The question struck like lightning, filling the room with charged silence. Tears welled in my father's eyes. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if seeing his youngest daughter for the first time. Then, with a pained sigh, he whispered, No. Laura swayed on her feet. No. She echoed. I loved her, my father admitted, his voice barely steady. But she was never my wife. She was someone he swallowed hard. She was someone I had an affair with, and when she became pregnant with you, I couldn't leave my family. But when she passed away, I had no choice but to bring you into my home, to raise you as my own. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Laura's breath hitched. So, what are you saying? That I don't even belong here. My father took a step forward. Laura, you've always been my daughter in my heart. I never saw you as anything less. But Laura wasn't listening. The betrayal she had inflicted on me was now mirrored in her own eyes. She had spent her entire life believing she was the favored one, the one who had everything handed to her. Now, she realized that her place in our family had been built on lies. And for the first time in her life, she was the outsider. She turned to David, desperation lacing her voice. You still love me, right? David didn't answer immediately. His silence stretched between them like an open wound. Laura's breath quickened. David. But something in his expression had shifted. The confidence he once had, the certainty that he had made the right choice in leaving me for her, was gone. David had been drawn to Laura's perfection, her ability to always come out on top. But now, he was seeing the cracks. The illusion of her golden life had shattered, and he was staring at the broken pieces. I need some time to think, he said at last. It was a death sentence. Laura's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. David had betrayed me for her. And now, he was about to betray her too. Laura let out a hollow laugh, the sound of a woman who had lost everything in the span of an hour. This isn't happening, she whispered. This can't be happening. But it was. The wall she had built around herself, the image of perfection, the life she had stolen, it was all collapsing. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. I took a step forward, meeting her gaze with an eerie calm. Now you know what it feels like, I said softly. She turned to me, her face a twisted mess of emotions, anger, sorrow, disbelief. But I didn't stay to see what she would do next. I had wasted too much of my life suffering because of her. Now, it was her turn to live with the consequences. And I was finally free. I stepped out of the house into the crisp night air, inhaling deeply as if breathing for the first time in years. The weight of Laura's betrayal, the anger, the pain, I felt it all peeling away, layer by layer. Inside, chaos still unfolded. My mother tried to console my father. David and Laura stood in the wreckage of their relationship, neither willing to meet the other's eyes. But I didn't care anymore. For so long, I had let my sister's actions define my pain. I had let her steal my joy, manipulate my world, and make me question my own worth. But tonight, the truth had set me free in a way I never expected. I wasn't the broken one anymore. As I walked to my car, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Cass, Sid. I turned. It was my father. His face was drawn with years of secrets, his eyes pleading. I know you hate me, he said, breathless. And I know I failed you. But I need you to understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I studied him for a long moment, searching for the man I once admired. He had raised me, loved me, been the foundation of my life. And yet, he had also created this mess. I don't hate you, I said, my voice even. But I don't know if I can forgive you either. His shoulders sagged. He had expected that. I just don't understand why you protected her, I continued. Why you let her destroy my life and never once held her accountable. A pained look crossed his face. Because I saw too much of myself in her, he admitted. Her selfishness, her recklessness, I knew where it came from. And I thought, if I just loved her enough, I could fix it. I shook my head. You didn't fix it. You let it fester. He nodded, swallowing hard. I see that now. For a moment, we stood there in silence, father and daughter, two people caught in the wreckage of choices that weren't entirely our own. I need time, I said finally. He nodded. I'll wait. I turned, leaving him standing there, knowing that whatever relationship we had left would take years to repair, if it ever could be. A week passed before I heard anything about Laura. Apparently, David had packed a bag and left. Maybe the weight of betrayal had finally been too much for him, or maybe he realized he had built his life with someone who was just as capable of deceit as he was. Either way, Laura was alone now. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the call I received from my mother. She's not doing well, she said hesitantly. I know you don't owe her anything, but I thought you should know. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, debating whether I cared. After everything, did Laura's suffering mean anything to me? The answer was complicated. I didn't wish her happiness, but I also didn't wish her destruction. She had spent her life taking from others, but now, for the first time, she had to sit in her own emptiness. No husband. No golden child status. No illusion of being better than everyone else. Just herself. And maybe that was the real punishment. I never called her back. 3 months later, I was sitting at a small cafe, sipping my coffee, when a man approached my table. Cass Sid. I looked up. David. I had expected to feel anger. But I didn't. David. I acknowledged him with a nod. He looked different. The arrogance was gone. He seemed thinner, tired, like a man who had finally seen the consequences of his actions. "Can I sit?" he asked. I considered it for a moment before nodding. He slid into the chair across from me, drumming his fingers against the table. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "For everything." I raised an eyebrow. "For cheating on me? Or for realizing that you threw your life away for someone just as deceitful as you?" He winced. "I deserved that." I took a sip of my coffee, waiting. "I thought I loved her," he admitted. "But after everything came out, I realized I never really knew her. Not like I thought I did." I set my cup down. "You didn't know me either." "Not really." He looked at me, regret swimming in his eyes. "No, I didn't." Silence stretched between us. "I'm not looking for forgiveness," he said finally. "I just wanted you to know that I regret everything. And that you deserved better." I tilted my head, considering him. "Yeah," I said. "I did." He nodded, as if that was the only closure he needed, and stood. "Goodbye, Cass Sid." I watched as he walked away, and for the first time in years, I felt no pain. No anger. Just peace. The past was behind me now. And I was finally free. Life has a way of balancing the scales, even when we least expect it. For years, I thought I was the one who had lost everything. My marriage, my trust, my family. I had watched it all crumble at the hands of my sister and the man I once loved. But what I didn't realize then was that loss can sometimes be the best gift. I lost David, but I found myself. I lost the illusion of family loyalty, but I gained clarity. And Laura. She had taken everything from me, believing she had one. But in the end, she was left with nothing. I never spoke to her again after that night. Not because I hated her. I had exhausted my hatred long ago. No, it was because I had no reason to look back. Laura was someone who had spent her whole life manipulating the world around her, taking what she wanted without a second thought. Now, for the first time, she had to sit in her own silence, without anyone to blame but herself. As for my father, our relationship would never be what it once was. The trust had been fractured too deeply, and some wounds don't heal. But I chose to let go of the anger. Not for him, but for me. And David. He was nothing more than a chapter one had closed. A cautionary tale, a lesson learned. One day, years from now, Laura might look back and understand what she did. She might feel the weight of her choices and finally comprehend the destruction she caused. Or maybe she won't. Either way, it's not my concern anymore. Because for the first time in a long time, I'm happy. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Not in a way that demands to be seen. But in a quiet, peaceful way, the kind that lingers in the spaces between breaths, the kind that whispers, "You made it." I don't need revenge. I don't need an apology. Have my life back. And that is enough.